The Glitterpill Podcast. With your host, Samantha Kuttner.
Being visible, it's hard being female. It's hard being working class. It's fucking hard. This conversation was hard. Extending empathy to figures who don't deserve it is hard. Why do I keep talking? What do I want to say? What do I want to say? Why do I even want to do this episode? It wasn't just to rip into JD Vance. I want to highlight how hard it is to have a prolonged conversation about structural inequality and how the default is chalking it up to a moral failure. And never is this truer than in rural America, where shitting all over the poor is still acceptable. Rarely, if ever, do we take a moment to think about the figures at the top who created the conditions that caused the suffering and the poverty and the trauma. Trauma that JD Vance experienced, trauma that he's probably still dealing with. But hopefully this conversation, as clunky as it may be at times on my end, introduces different perspectives to consider and a more nuanced approach.
The Glitterpill Podcast.
I'm glad that we kind of started talking on Twitter, and it's not always a cesspool of terrible stuff. Yes. But I think that we can just kind of dive right in, and if there's anything that you want to touch on, or you feel like if you want me to ask you any questions, feel free to just dive in there.
Yeah,
what
of
else
course.
is about? I like to over prepare. Okay, so I study a group called the Proud Boys, and their leader talked a lot about me search and how bad it is. But I find it really interesting that these assholes all have memoirs, because that is research. So why not talk about ourselves and how we found ourselves in the fields we found ourselves in? Could you tell everyone a little bit about your background and how you got into the work you do?
Yeah. So I come from rural Appalachia, and went to college at Harvard and took my first computer science course there and was really interested in it. I was always interested in STEM, but didn't really know anything about computer science. There weren't computer science courses or anything computer related courses at my high school or any of the surrounding areas. And there also aren't tech companies or jobs in the area. So it just wasn't something I learned about until college, and then I really fell in love with it. Our first course assignment for CS50 was making a video game. I've always been really into video games, and it was so fun. I just stayed up multiple nights putting way more effort into it than was necessary to make it fun. And I really enjoyed it. And then I was okay, I really like making cool creative projects and doing logic problem solving. This feels like a good fit. But I also studied psychology because I don't know. I like to study a lot of things. It was very bad for me to pick a major because I just kept taking classes in different subjects. From there, I've been working at different tech companies as a software developer. And that is, I stream on Twitch for fun. I do a little bit of content creation. I don't really like saying that because I don't know that I take it very seriously. I don't really have an up-to-date YouTube channel, and I stream pretty irregularly on the schedule just because of work stuff and other projects that I'm working on. But I do it for fun. I like cosplay, gaming, talking about anime and just different nerdy programming, different nerdy things that I like in general. Just random. It is kind of just, there is no niche. It's just a bunch of random things that I like. So
yeah, I like that too. Dancing, research, social psych stuff, understanding internet subcultures.
It's just whichever the wind blows that way. That day it's whatever. That's what I'm going to be into. So that's fun.
Yeah, and I think before I even heard you talking about JD Vance, I saw your tweet that said, raw milk is bad, actually, and everyone lost their minds. Do you want to tell everyone about kind of how you found yourself in that weird raw milk space?
Yeah, it really was accidental. As like, I've had so many random, just extremely viral tweets and like sagas that have gone on just by accident. So I tweeted a milk meme about drinking 2% milk. So I tweeted, it was like, it's like a really corny joke that said like, yeah, I have a porn addiction to pouring myself another glass of 2% milk because I like milk. And I'd been watching The Boys, and I don't know if you watched The Boys, but Homelander is one of the main characters, and he really drinks milk a lot, okay, in a really ridiculous way. So I was making milk meme, and I got like a suspicious amount of commenters that were like, oh, you're not a real milk drinker if you don't drink raw milk. You need to drink raw milk. You need to try raw milk. I was getting slightly agitated. I'm not going to lie. I was getting slightly agitated by the volume of raw milk proponents because I was like, no, I'm not going to drink it. So I'm commenting back, memeing with my community and like the random people that are joining. So I'm kind of like, no, I'm not. Haha. No, I'm not going to try raw milk. Are you kidding? Haha. No way. So I'm kind of like, wait, are you guys serious? And there were a couple of guys that were just like, no, try it. Don't knock it till you try. And I was like, okay, you're not about to try to force me. No, I mean, obviously it's like all a joke, but I'm like, okay, I'm just going to make my opinion on this clear. So I stopped getting people asking me to try raw milk in my comments. So then I made a separate tweet that was just like, hey, I personally think if you buy raw milk at a grocery store, like you are paying more money to drink more bacteria. And I think it's stupid if you would just buy raw milk at a grocery store, right? Like, I think you've got to be stupid to do that. So I was like, the raw milk enjoyers will not frequent my page anymore. But they came out in droves. Naturally, it has like 10 million views or something and thousands of comments of people very, very angry at me and investigating everything about my life, trying to find like negatives or things that I may have done wrong at some point in history. I was loosely accused of being affiliated with the manufacturing of Mountain Dew Code Red, which was very amusing to me. But yeah, there was a lot of just like crazy people. I didn't know that pasteurization had anything to do with like racism, white supremacy discourse, but I was met with many groypers who were like, and different other like white supremacy accounts that were like pasteurization is Jewish, like you're drinking Jewish milk. And I was like, what? Louis Pasteur was not Jewish, so I don't really know like what the connection is there to like where they've imagined that it's like something to do. But yeah, I got like also thousands of messages from people accusing me of being Jewish and like spreading Jewish propaganda, which I am not Jewish. I don't care if pasteurization is Jewish or not. It just has dangerous bacteria in it,
The not going to the hospital would be the more important part, right?
Yeah, it's just like, I don't want to get food poisoning. I don't want to get salmonella, tuberculosis, listeria, anything that raw milk contains. So it's very simple. I'm pro heating animal products that are not safe to eat raw until the bacteria has been removed safely, and doesn't compromise. There's no proven studies, there's like some loose observational studies, but there's no like real proven thing that nutritional value is being lost. Just like there's not with when we cook chicken or beef or any other raw animal products. So, I'm just very pro doing that. Also got a lot of libertarians that were kind of like angry with me. You can't control what milk people drink. And I was like, I'm not. Like, I'm not in charge. What do you mean? And they were just like, yeah, it is really stupid, but you can't force them to stop. You should stop trying to force them to stop. And I'm like, guys,
there's a very like, I think I shared something recently about how the evolution of like thinking critically about things in this weird stage of disinformation, it just gets crazier and crazier. And it was like, for me, it was like, what's the nature of truth in 2020? And then it's like, where's my crayons? Where's my helmet? And then it's like, JD Vance, raw milk, blah, blah, blah. But there's actually a non-tinfoil hat connection to all these different new right libertarian-esque figures. And a lot of the Jewish stuff comes in later because the libertarian anti-government, don't tell me what to do. The same people that would tell you like not to put on seatbelts because you can't tell me what to do. You know, anti-government overreach. And oh yeah, government's also Jewish, so pasteurization is. You know, the planes are just melted.
Yeah, it's a lot of jumping through different hoops and conclusions to like reach that point. And also just who cares, right? Like, I don't know, like if pasteurization, like if a lot of scientists are against it, are pro-pasteurization, are against raw milk because it, you know, can contribute to foodborne illnesses, you can technically like still drink it if you want to, right? In like many states, like you just can't sell it, but you can still drink it. So I don't know. I don't see the huge issue with being super mad at someone for like thinking it's stupid to drink it or like drinking pasteurized milk. It definitely feels like a non-issue to get worked up over like this hardcore, like so many of the other things, right? That are like people are intensely worked up over. It's just like,
yeah. I mean, a lot of figures like JD Vance and that weird undercurrent, they claim to be against like the quote unquote cathedral of secular liberalism because of all of its dogma and all of that. But they're some of the most dogmatic, psychologically rigid individuals you've never met, you know? Because if you were to, you know, go through their own logic, anyone should be able to freely express anything, right? But you say something and then it's like, oh, you're a Jew. Like,
yeah, there's a lot of just like not, I don't know. I feel like a lot of things that I've encountered with people that want to like lightly debate me online or like comment on my post, it's just like a lack of consistency with their values and just like complete hypocrisy on so many levels. Like you have no idea how many men have, you know, I don't do any form of sex work or I'm not safe for work content or anything like any sexual content, but I've had so many men come in and just assume that I do because, you know, I'm like a woman that does games and like Twitch online and stuff like that. So I'll get comments like shaming me for having, and they're like, oh, you have an OnlyFans, or just an OnlyFans girl, like you're whatever. And you click on, you don't know how many times I've just like went moderately viral or had a tweet where I just click on their likes tab, but when likes were public and scroll through and it's just OnlyFans girls for an hour. They're replying. They're like, please DM me your titty pics. Okay. Like, and they're commenting and shaming girls. So there's just like so much projection and self-hatred. I feel like in general with all of that, where you just find a lack of consistent ideals, like to where I'm getting comments from a guy who's like freaking out at me for saying I don't want to drink raw milk and that I think raw milk drinkers are stupid. But then he's like, we have freedom. We can do whatever we want. We can think whatever we want. And I'm like, yes. So why can I not think this? Right? Like there's just so many, they just don't add up at all. And there's so many people that are like, there was a guy who left a comment on a post that I liked from a friend. And he's like, oh, yeah. He's like, you're not realizing what it's like to be canceled. You know, like, F you, you're getting canceled. You're getting what's coming to you, right? Like, conservative influencer.
Like, we inherently deserve something for being visible. You know?
Well, this is like a guy who has political commentary, right? So he's like, oh, yeah, you're getting canceled. You're getting what's coming to you. I click on his profile and his banner said, FUCK cancel culture. And I was just like, I just feel like there are a lot of people who don't recognize their own hypocrisies or like inconsistencies within their value system and how they act. And then with it all out there online, like to see, like we can see all their old tweets. We can see the accounts they follow. We used to see their likes tab. There's just proof of it that maybe you wouldn't see if we just had IRL interaction. Like you might not, you know, you can't just pull up a log of proof of like hypocrisies from someone, right? Like if I talk to someone, they're like, yeah, I hate OnlyFans, I hate porn stars. And I don't know, like, you know, we don't have an online record or social media. I can't just pull over to the replies tab and be like, wait, but you're supporting them. Like you consume it all the time, right? So I think that's interesting about like the digital landscape and these political controversies.
Yeah, yeah. And then also, I mean, the other component is like, yes, you're an attractive woman, but you're also a computer scientist, right? Like,
Yeah.
professional. And computer science is notoriously difficult. And I wonder if you also encounter a lot of things that women in other male-dominated spaces encounter with like your perception of your credibility or anything like that.
Yeah, I feel like I've had an interesting journey with that and with like feminism and the perception of credibility in STEM. So I grew up in the rural South, in rural Appalachia, and I never experienced the type of sexism that I faced. It was a different type. I didn't experience the type of sexism that I faced when I was in a Harvard classroom or at a tech company, right? And I think this is like many layers deep, but there's like, some sort of feminist theories on that, like in the South, there's kind of this sexism that's different, that's like put women on a pedestal, like always hold the door open for them, don't say curse words in front of them, women never do these certain things kind of thing. But I never really dealt with this idea that I was just like incompetent. I don't know if that's just my community or like Appalachian values, but women have been hard workers that have been tough and rough, which even JD Vance talks about, and maybe he's right about that one part, right? So for a long time around here, a woman shooting a gun would not be seen as like, oh, she can't do that, right? Like it's not. I think it's a little bit different. And just growing up in a small town, like everybody knows you. So, as a kid and like as a high schooler, like middle schooler, I was kind of known as one of the smart kids. Like that was just, so I never went in a classroom or a professional environment and people were just like expecting me not to know what I'm talking about, right? I was stereotyped as a smart kid. I'd known the same people my entire life. It's a small town, it's a small school. So then when I went to Harvard and got into some of these computer science classes where I'm like one of three girls, I kind of, for the first time, was like, oh, so this is what feminists are talking about. This subtle, inexplainable, like I remember sitting at a table with three boys in a discrete math for computer science course, and we're solving some sort of logic theorem problem. I can't even remember, but I remember having an answer, and I was like, what if we do it like this? No one listened. They just keep doing it the way that they're doing it. I'm like, I kind of think that this might be a good idea. I'm just going to work on it. And, lo and behold, that's the answer, of course, right? Like, that's just almost how it always goes. And they didn't even acknowledge that was something I'd said and suggested, because they didn't even know, because they didn't even listen to what I said when I said it, right? They just immediately dismissed it without even listening to the idea, just like in one ear and out the other. And I think that that's obviously not that common, like if you're just working day to day at a tech company, but it happens way more to women than it happens to men, right? It's not every day, all day, but it happened, that exact same scenario. And that was like my first kind of awakening where I was like, oh, like they're onto something. I didn't experience this in my rural hometown. If I was in a group with guys, they were like, oh, let Madison do all the work. Let Madison do all the work. She knows how to do it, like, oh, thank God we're on a group project with Madison, So that was very different.
Yeah. I mean, there's a great book. What is it called? It's not Oh No Tech Bro, but it's just like a similar vein. Brotopia, which talks about how like back in the day, women were in computer science profession, and it was actually kind of more of the norm, because it was not quite secretarial work, but it was, technical work that was just the norm. But then somehow the standard became like literally antisocial, cocky men.
Yeah.
Like they actually self-selected for that. So, I mean, all the stuff that's happening in the world makes a ton of sense. And it just seems to make a ton of sense to the same people in Silicon Valley that back JD Vance also have very strong beliefs about raw milk and government overreach and the Jews and whatever you might want to call it. But the other thing that intrigued me about you is, this perspective of like, what the hell is JD Vance talking about? He doesn't speak for us, right? And I would love to kind of rip his book apart together. I obviously value your perspective as someone who actually grew up in Appalachia. So maybe wherever you want to start, we can go from there.
Yeah, there's a lot to break down in the book. I feel like it's, to actually go through it all is a pretty long conversation, but there's probably quite a few things that we could, go through and hit on with like the big major points. I think I got a lot of insight to what people's pushback would be to my argument when I did have a tweet go semi-viral about Hillbilly Elegy and about JD Vance and my criticisms of it and Appalachia's criticisms of it. I got some pushback. So my kind of opinion would just be like, and this is something that I've heard from Republicans, conservatives, like anywhere on the political spectrum. Like most Appalachians do not like the representation of the book. It's just kind of a common, none of us like JD Vance, right? That's just been the case for a while. And if people don't have a problem with him, they probably just haven't read his book or don't know much about him because it's pretty universal. And so my argument was kind of, we don't really like him. He doesn't give a good representation of Appalachia. And as Andy Beshear, Kentucky governor, said last week, he said he ain't from here, which is, the biggest insult to non-Appalachian. So he's not really from the area. He grew up at the majority, by far and large, of his childhood in Middletown, Ohio, which is not Appalachia. It's more of the Rust Belt. And he spent like maybe a few summers in Jackson, Kentucky, which is Appalachia, but, he's young. And he's mainly speaking from the perspective of his grandmother was Appalachian and she helped raise him, right? So he's kind of assigning stereotypes and like all these things to the region without having actually lived there. And even if he did, if that's your experience, you can't assign massive negative stereotypes to people from an entire region. Like you can't know the entire population, even living there long enough, but especially not if you're not from there at all. Mm-hmm. And so some things that kind of people push back on is they're like, oh, well, like you can't say that it's not true because it's his story. You don't know his story. Maybe your experience was different. And it's like, and throughout the book, he goes through a lot. He goes through a lot of trauma. He goes through a lot, and I felt sympathy for him at times throughout the book, for sure. But, I don't assign specific stereotypes of things that I went through to an entire group of people, especially if it wasn't even those people, right? Like if I wasn't even in Appalachia myself, right? He's like, oh, well, like I have this family member and like she is from there and she has these behaviors. So I'm going to make broad conclusions about this entire population. And the problem is not when he tells his story. The problem is when he says things like he makes the claims that the men in the area are like vastly unemployed and like just lazier than people in other populations. They just want to like blame their problems on Obama is something that he says, right? But for some reason, that sounds like, pretty anti-conservative rhetoric. But as you know, he's gone back and forth on his political positions at any time that it benefits him, seemingly. So it's just like, there are a lot of, he says at one point, he tells a story pretty early on in the book about how he knew a guy who got fired from a job because he kept taking long bathroom breaks and showing up to work late. And he just didn't really want to work. He was a lazy guy. And when he got fired, he was mad about it. Like he had the nerve to be mad about it, even though he wasn't doing his job. He wasn't being a hard worker. And he's basically implying. And then he uses that to draw broad conclusions about the area, which is the Rust Belt. Yeah. So he's talking about the Rust Belt of Ohio where that happened. But he uses his book, though, is about Appalachia and the people of Appalachia. So then he's kind of like, oh, well, like, see, all the people here are just lazy. But it's like, okay, well, first of all, you're not talking about Appalachia, even though like the book's broad theme is about like things that are wrong with Appalachia. And second of all, like one guy taking long bathroom breaks at a job does not characterize a region. There are guys like that everywhere. There are people like that everywhere, that take too long at a bathroom break and show up late sometimes. And, I don't blame them. I mean, sometimes blue collar work is hard. Okay. Like, it's hard. And a lot of people, like politicians like JD Vance, they don't do that kind of work now. So, who are they to judge someone who does. At the time when he wrote this book, he was a Yale law graduate. And as an Ivy League grad myself, who actually grew up in rural Appalachia, we're pretty privileged compared to the people that actually live here and actually work hard for the most part, right? Like, I mean, not that I don't do work, but I'm not out doing physical labor in the coal mines. I'm not on a construction site and making, they're making less money. They're working hard physical labor. I don't know. It feels like a bizarre judgment to make from his position to then turn around and be like, oh, they must just all be lazy or they would be wealthy like me. Right. It feels like unfair.
Very, very unfair. And, he talks about, I listened to his whole book, and yes, I empathize with what he went through, but the overarching trajectory of his life is like every other story. I got out, and everyone else needs to do better. And I don't think he realizes as like at an individual level, like, let's say there's systemic issues that impacted his family that led to a significant amount of trauma that he experienced, that he may or may not still be grappling with. If he can't resolve that and he thinks you should be able to like fix it all on your own, it's going to be this like spiral of shame and all kinds of things. It's not even helpful to him. But to be like, I got out, I'm technically like more privileged and you can too, feels a little bit pyramid schemey. And I grew up working class, but I came from a family that really in a culture that valued learning, and that got me really far. Got a public education, wound up just being in a very weird place at the right time. And, like we're all kind of products of our environment. And maybe if you're open to talking about how you got to where you got, like, I mean, you were always good in school. And were people actively recruiting in like for Harvard and other, top tier colleges in your area, or did you have to go reach out for those opportunities, or how did that happen?
Yeah, it was a really interesting journey for me. I always kind of wanted to go somewhere like Harvard in the back of my mind when I was younger, and always like really valued learning and really wanted like more opportunities for learning, because I did go to like, I went to one of the poorest high schools in the poorest county, one of the poorest counties. It's like top 15 in the U.S. So there were, and I think I had amazing teachers. I had like amazing people in my community, but there weren't, just because there's not money for it, there weren't a lot of like the same educational opportunities that people in other areas, even, somewhat nearby had, right? So I really was just like hungry for that. I wanted to learn so much more. There were so many classes and subjects that I wanted to learn about that just weren't offered in my high school. So going somewhere that had that kind of was just like, not something that I was like, oh, I'm definitely going to Harvard, I'm definitely going to Yale, anything like that. But it was like in the back of my mind is I would love to do something like that, and I might try. And so when I did decide to apply, no one at my school knew how to do that or could help me with that. I was just kind of on my own. I later went back as a recruiter for Harvard to low-income areas, and every high school that I went to in Appalachia, there was not a single guidance counselor that knew how to apply to Ivy League schools at the time. And it's just not something that is normalized or expected. I had a couple of guidance counselors make comments to me like, oh, honey, like, we're not going to have any kids from our high school go to a school like Harvard. Like, you don't need to waste your time. And I was like, no, I did though. Like, I was at that school, and I went there, and not my high school didn't do that because they know me, but like in the area, I was like, oh, I'm actually from, a worse off high school, lower ranked high school than this. And I went there, and I'm going to teach other kids how to do it, kind of thing. And so I kind of had to push for that. So it's kind of the attitude, and part of like the way that JD Vance and people like that talk about that is we are not capable of doing more, of leaving the area. That's like a huge stereotype that's pushed on you. So I'm really grateful that I did end up, because I thought it's bizarre for me to look back on, right? But I had insane standardized test scores, insane GPA. I wrote a great essay. I had so many extracurriculars, just like because I wanted to do all those things, and was naturally smart. And I thought there was no chance I would get accepted to an Ivy League school. Like, this is how I think negative our confidence is in the area, just like from stereotypes. And it's like, wait, I was like a shoo-in. I was higher, significantly higher average, or significantly higher than the average stats of like other Harvard admissions, and also from really poor area in Appalachia. And I thought there was no way I would ever get in, right? So I think looking back on that, it became very important to me to educate like other students from the area and just people in general in the area about like, you know, believing in themselves, making them believe in themselves. Like, that's the most important thing to me. So I ended up just, you know, gunning it and submitting an application to several Ivy League schools the night before the app was due, because I'd already written other college apps. And I was like, oh, I'm just going to submit it. What can happen? And I did not expect to get in at all. And I got into all of them and was extremely grateful. So it was kind of just like, I think I had a few people. I went to a summer program before my senior year that for the top high school students in the state. And I've had a few people from that and teachers just like kind of believe in me and give me like just enough, just a little bit of confidence to just submit the app anyways. Because if I hadn't done that and hadn't done those people, I definitely wouldn't have done it. And I even like strongly hesitated until the last day because I was like, oh, there's no point, even though it was free. And
Right.
I had, you know, I had crazy high test scores and stats and stuff. I was just like, oh, there's no way. Right. There's no way I could do that. And it's not the same attitude that people have in other areas, right? It's if someone is the valedictorian at a really good high school in New York City, they think, yes, I am entitled to getting, you know, this, not all of them, right? But I've seen so many viral tweets and YouTube videos of kids who are like, I made this on my SAT and I had this GPA and I had these extracurriculars and I didn't get accepted to these Ivy League schools. You know, is this reverse racism? Is this, you know, like discrimination? Is this fair? And I'm like, wait, I had way higher stats than they do. And I thought there was no way I would get in. So it's crazy to me to imagine having at average, below average, slightly above average stats and think that you're entitled to a spot there. That's just not the same confidence level or the same environment that I was brought up in at all. It's a huge cultural shift. So I think that that's one of the big reasons why we don't see a lot of rural Appalachia to Ivy League students. You know, people are not taught to believe in themselves. But since I did do the recruiting work, we've had quite a few from the area that have gone to Ivy League schools. And they've continued the recruiting work. But yeah, there were like maybe 4 to 6 in the couple years after I went back to the schools to do recruiting work. So, and I was the only one when I went. So it's very, very cool.
That's awesome that you're bringing more people to that and showing them what's possible, because sometimes they just need to have some image of, oh, I can actually do that, you know, some version of representation that I'm out there doing this, you know?
Yeah.
But, you know, JD Vance doesn't strike me as particularly enlightening figure, you know?
Yeah.
I know more, and for what I know, just, you know, I don't know the region to speak about the region, but from what I know about growing up working class and what I know from my working class friends is we're resilient and really hard workers. So the stereotype of being lazy or unambitious, or I forget what specific characterizations he made, it's just in a lot of cases not accurate.
Yeah, I think that working class people are not working class because they're lazy. Excuse me. Sorry, I had pneumonia for 2 months. Oh no. Yeah, I'm just like on the recovery. This is my first like podcast, talk, stream, anything, but it's like pretty much better, but it like comes like a few times a day. So, but I'm totally fine. I've had antibiotics and it has been like 5.5 weeks since I got it, but it's still like, coming and lasting. But yeah, I think the idea that working class people are working class because they're lazy is just crazy. Like, there are probably, not every single student to ever come through, but there are probably, so many students who have come through JD Vance's high school or my high school. They were absolutely capable of going to Yale Law like he did or Harvard undergrad like I did, and just didn't submit that application, didn't have somebody to believe in them, right? Like, and they're working a working class job. And aside from that, even if they weren't capable of that, most working class people are working, I don't know, like really hard, like working harder than me, right? And a lot of people that I work with, there's like just a lot of people, at least in my area and like in my family, like, my grandfather was working class his entire life. And, so was I, until I had the opportunity to go to Harvard, and I've never seen anybody work harder than him, right? If you get dealt those cards and that's what you have to work with, you have to work really hard to make do with it, right? It's not a walk in the park.
Yeah. One of the things that people don't often talk about is both poverty as a moral failing and drug addiction. It's always like the onus is on the individual, and there's major structural failures that happen. Like, people will talk about the opioid epidemic at the individual level, like, this person's a terrible person. But when Elon Musk openly speaks about his addiction to Ambien, he's going through a personal struggle. And I find it so interesting what people get afforded by virtue of the class they find themselves in or move up to.
Yeah, I was wondering if we were going to talk about this, because I was like, I think the difference between addiction between like the working class and the wealthy people is just like, it's acceptable if you're wealthy, and it's not acceptable if you're poor. And that's pretty much it. Like, you have no idea how many people I went to Harvard with whose family names have Wikipedia pages and are insanely wealthy that, were doing drugs regularly, that were doing opioids, that were doing cocaine, regularly. And I've never participated I've never done any drugs or anything like that. So personally, like, I don't have experience. So I was kind of just like really shocked to see that was like a big culture shock thing for me, because I just wasn't, I don't know, I'd never been to like parties or anything like that and I never did anything like that. So I was just like, oh my God, like, these people do drugs too, not just the poor hillbillies of, like that of where I'm from, but like, you guys are doing more drugs than they are, but they don't, I don't know. It's like, it's crazy to see, and not that every person is like this, but it's crazy to see like, one night in a dorm party, some of the richest kids in the world are doing drugs, doing lines of cocaine, and then they walk outside the next day and they'll look at the homeless person who's coked out on drugs with disgust, right? And walk past them and not talk to them for that reason, right? And it's just like, the irony of it all is pretty crazy.
Yeah. I got through his book, and yes, like, what he went through was traumatic, yes, but, trauma's an explanation and not an excuse. And I feel like his perception on women and what they should do is just so skewed. And, it's not my place to do like how much of this comes from his mom or all this other stuff. Is he trying to get back at his mother? Like it's not even a useful thing. But, I wonder what it is about men who claim their freedom doesn't want to be encroached on, to the extent that they are strong advocates for drinking raw milk. And yet they're so willing to try to get legislation passed that restricts our freedom. Like, the concept of personal autonomy not extend to us? Like, why? I mean, I just wonder if you have any thoughts about the inconsistencies that you've seen with men online who have treated you every which way for your views on Vance, for you being a computer science person, for cosplay, for anything. That's just like, wow, people are remarkably inconsistent.
Yeah, there's just so much inconsistency, like across the board. Like the people who are like, the same people who will tweet like, oh, like we need to have freedoms, like we need to have the right to consume raw milk, for example, will turn around and then be like, oh, but like a woman, if she's not a stay-at-home mom and like a trad wife, if she has like a degree or a job, then she's not doing her part for society, right? And it's kind of like, this freedom should extend to everybody, right? Like, everybody should have the freedom to choose like the life that they live. So I feel like that's a big kind of proponent. And I just, there's so much just like, that meme that's like, when you say this thing that you like pancakes and then someone comes in and attacks you for not liking waffles, you're like, but I never said that. I think like there's just so much of that because like I said, I had some guy accused me of, having a gender studies major. And I was like, oh no, I graduated with a degree in psychology and computer science. And then I get weirdly thousands of comments that are like, you're never going to find a man. You're never going to have like a husband and kids and a family because you have a college degree. And it's like, so many people in America do both. It's just like, why? And they were angry at me. Like, why would you pick this over family? Why would you not have a family? We need to repopulate the earth. Like, first of all, like, it's not your business. But second of all, like, you can do both. It is not like that hard. I feel like the majority of America, of married America, they both have jobs. Like, it is not
in this economy. Yeah,
it's more common even, right, to do that. It's like there's just no, I don't know. Like, is there just no, like, it has to be one thing, all one way. Like, I don't know. It's just like this idea that, or if it's like, oh well, if you say that you support this one thing that I perceive to be of a certain ideology, then I'm going to angrily get mad at you for an assumption that I'm doing in my head of something that you also believe, right? So it's like, I'll say like something like, men shouldn't talk to women this way when someone says something absolutely crazy to me, right? And then they'll be like, yeah, but you think so you think it's okay for women to talk to men that way? Lord have mercy, no. When did I say that? And I feel like that's just like a super huge problem with online discourse, is that people will just assume one thing without hearing it at all and make that their entire argument. It's like, your argument is like fan fiction that you wrote in your head when you got upset at this tweet. I don't know how else to explain. So I feel like that's another huge problem in addition to just like the inconsistencies, right? It's like, that didn't happen.
Yeah, like I wonder if even Vance honestly sees himself as representing Appalachia, and is just going with his little screed or delusion that he's of the community, he can speak for the community, and if everyone just pulls themselves up by their bootstraps, they'll be just as good as him, despite the fact that he's backed by literally like Peter Thiel and Silicon Valley investors who somehow he failed up. He wasn't successful running for his other positions, and now he's going to be Trump's VP pick. I don't know if you've heard some of the couch stuff.
Yeah, I've heard the meme.
But, oh man. Before I get into that, have you heard of the new right? Are you familiar with their ideology and their worldview?
I've probably been made familiar with it online, but I don't know like the exact terminologies or what it encompasses.
Okay, so they have this concept in the new right of the cathedral being secular liberalism, and it's this own religion in itself because you can't critique it. It's dogmatic. It's very demanding. It's one of those things. So when people critique the cathedral, they're trying to critique establishment, right? But in a lot of ways, like Vance has attended these elite universities and has worked in the establishment. So he's like the very type of establishment figure that he claims to be attacking, And I wish more people could, sorry, I wish more people, we backtrack. People already know that he's, not what he says he is, right? But it's not just being like anti-Vance, because that's not really productive. Like, what would you like people listening to know about Appalachia and perhaps the resiliency that people don't or might not even be aware of?
Yeah, to start off, to touch on Vance, to be honest, I don't really think he even believes a lot of what he says. Like, as we've seen, like, he's gone back and forth. He said, for like 3 or 4 years ago, I don't know how many years ago, he said Trump could never be elected. Like, he said, like, he'll ruin the country, whatever. And then, now he's his running mate and worships him, right? He also, he's just like flip-flopped on so many positions whenever it's convenient for him. So I don't, aside from just like his book being a harmful narrative, because it was such a bestseller, to him personally, I feel like I don't pay much mind. I don't think he even believes what he said. Or I don't know, like maybe like he believes like the stereotypes and he's like internalized some trauma from what he went through. But a lot of what he says, I don't think he even believes it, to be honest. I think what's important about it is that I think he knew that message would sell, and that message hits home for just like a lot. It just hits for a lot of people. Like, that's what they want to believe. So to hear from someone from that area say it, so supposedly claiming to be from that area say it, it's like, oh, my biases, people like to have their biases confirmed, right? Like, of course you do. And it was like after the Trump election, and people are like, wait, how could they possibly have elected Trump? People are looking for someone to blame. So then liberals as well were quick to jump on, like, huge celebration from like mainstream liberals for Hillbilly Elegy, because they want an explanation for why people voted Trump. So that's like one of the big reasons it's a bestseller. So like, I guess what I want to say is, of course there's drug addiction. Of course there's poverty, like we know these things. But the idea that people are lazy, stupid, not hard workers, is so untrue. And you have to be from a place, go to a place, and like get to know the people to actually know anything about it, in my opinion. And there's so many Appalachian scholars from the area that will tell you differently, right? Like, one accusation that I got online from the crazy person of the day was just like, oh, there's no way that Appalachian people like you there, that they accept you if you have pronouns in your bio, right? And it's like, I promise there are plenty of liberal people here. There are plenty of conservative people here. We are a community and we love each other. Like, there is no, first of all, most people that I talk to in real life in Appalachia would not know what the phrase pronouns in bio mean, because they're not chronically online like me, right, and the guys that are arguing with me, right? They would just be like, okay, what is that, right? Like, okay, you're a crazy person, right? So, and that's how like deep we get into this online discourse. But like, so many of the assumptions or stereotypes that you have are, like, obviously there's some truth to them, right? Like, there is some drug addiction. But the idea that it's just so common, and like, that's why like people are poor, and it's just, I don't know, like the way it's represented in media and by JD Vance, it's so divorced from reality in my experience. It's a book that I really like to recommend to people, because it's just like easy to read. It's a great book. It's a bestseller. It's Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. And I think what's important about it is it talks about addiction too. It's a story of like poverty and drug addiction in Appalachia. But what it does, the JD Vance's book doesn't do, is it tells the whole story. It tells the story of how Demon Copperhead became addicted, right? It doesn't just say, oh, he's poor and he's addicted. It tells like a story of a real human boy who just could not catch a break, right? Like, he's not just some number on the opioid crisis. He's humanized, just like real people. The art should be humanized from the area, right? And he ends up to where he just doesn't have another choice. He can't catch a break. And you can see that it's really not his fault. And that happens so often with addiction. Like, there have been so many cases of real people I know who have had serious health problems. Like, one of my closest family friend, one of my closest friends, her dad, has struggled a lot with opioid addiction. He worked, he worked his ass off night and day in the coal mines and had a severe back injury and was placed on opioids multiple times. And about like the third or fourth time, he ended up addicted. It just comes so fast. And, you know, it's been 10 or 15 years that he's struggled with it since then. And an entire life of never having that problem. And it's a lot of people just don't understand the human side of it. He just wasn't some lazy, bored guy who just wanted to shoot up heroin or something like that, right?
Yeah.
He was a hardworking man who, a great guy and a great family guy who had a serious back injury and was prescribed opioids one too many times and didn't know, you know, like if doctors are prescribing medication for a certain amount of time, like you're so likely to get like for these highly addictive medications for a certain amount of time, you can very easily get addicted. And if you don't know, you shouldn't be expected to know better than the doctor, right? And if you don't know any better, you can just end up in that situation, which is exactly the story of Demon Copperhead, the main character. He gets a serious injury, and the doctors and his, you know, adopted family, they tell him to keep taking them. That's what he's supposed to do. And then he can't get off of them. And then he can't function. And suddenly, like, everything's just tumbling apart because he didn't have anything going for him to begin with. And that's happened to so many people that I know. So I guess it's just like humanizing the person behind the addiction or the person behind the poverty, I think tells a much better story than telling your own story and blaming, like, the trauma and the things that people in your life did wrong, like the things that JD Vance's family members did wrong on Appalachia and Appalachian culture.
Right on. Like, there's a docudrama that has some of the real life stories of people who suffered from opioid addiction.
Yeah.
And it gets into, I believe it's Matthew Broderick plays Sackler, the guy who reconfigured the chemical combination to make something that is even more potent and addictive while marketing it as just happy, healthy pain relief. And sending women who more or less look like me, well, not me, I'm a little old, more or less look like you coming into rural areas and saying, you know, like, here are all the benefits, and like going to doctors and having all these incentives to sell them on stuff, push it on your clients, push it on this. And then if doctors are getting kickbacks and patients don't know, and they go into the office and they're like, oh, he's the doctor, so I'll do what he says because he's the authority figure, like most people think. Right?
Yeah.
Kind of the way they thought about the news before, you know, like of my grandparents' generation, like, you know, that was the news. That was a reliable source of information. So why would they ever mislead you? And then like getting to that whole space we're in now, like you'd have to be anticipating that. And nobody really anticipated people swooping into these areas and getting people hooked and addicted and all of that. And even though I am not of that area, I thought that docudrama was a very good way at humanizing what just happens to people who, like story, like character in your story, like can't catch a break.
Yeah.
And the other one, I don't know if you've seen it, the remake or the 2023 adaptation of The Fall of the House of Usher.
No, I haven't seen it. Is it good?
Okay, so Halloween season is almost coming up. I wait for that like every day. It's my favorite time of year. But this remake and this adaptation is brilliant writing. And in this context, the Usher family are engaging in all kinds of horrifically unethical behavior, but they made their fortune on, basically the authors modeled them on the Sackler family. And so it's really well written, psychological horror. It has some really like gross, gory scenes, but it's so well written and has such a captivating storyline. But within it is this overarching like, oh yeah, this super wealthy family is evil, and you're actually like not rooting for any of them, right? So like, I don't know, for Vance to talk about that and never fully acknowledge the structural inequalities, I find was a very interesting choice.
Yeah. I think that's like one of the reasons I recommend some of these other books so heavily over, because it tells the full story, right? The full story is not oh, people are poor and addicted to drugs, and it's because they're lazy. The full story is much more sinister, and is a much longer, more complete story that, you should come out, I think. Of course, there are some awful people, in every area, and there are some people who maybe don't want to be pulled out of situations, but there are so many people who are just in unfortunate situations, right? Where they were right that it would work in a place that was already stricken with poverty and disenfranchised from the coal mines and the horrible, this area was the rise of the labor unions and the labor movement because people were so exploited by the coal mines and the coal mining companies. So if you come to a place where someone, they don't have family members that can afford to help them or that have time, they're working, you go to someone who doesn't have anybody and they get addicted to an opioid, it's so different than someone who has people that'll be there for them and that have time and money to pull them out of it. So if you end up in an area with so many people who, are already poor from that and the coal mines and the exploitation is a whole long other story, but that's how these movement a crisis like the opioid crisis can successfully become a crisis. People are too poor to afford to fix it.
Last question. I appreciate so much time you've taken for this.
Yeah, no worries.
Well, it's two-pronged. In what ways do you think technology can help make things more equitable for people? And in what ways do you think it can actually just reinforce systems of oppression?
Yeah. So I think that one big thing about technology and new innovation in industry, a lot of coal mining areas of Appalachia have just been lacking in industry since the coal mines have practically shut down. So many people have been unemployed. They've lost just a huge, that was really the only industry in the area. There are not a lot of just factories or manufacturing plants or just normal blue collar jobs that you can do without, a college degree. And when that shut down, that is a huge thing. So I'd hope that as we maybe more loosely and abstractly as we progress, that there can be some new industry introduced to the area for people to have jobs, whether that is, cleaner energy or something completely unrelated. We just need, because I think a lot of people don't realize that coal is probably not coming back, not just because liberals have shut it down, but because there's not a demand for it. Our technology has progressed past the need for things like coal. So, I hope that there's a new industry that can provide as many jobs as it did to the area as technology progresses. As far and it's on the section of obviously, you can't solve addiction without solving poverty and without solving economic inequality, because it's just on such a systematic level. But, on the fronts of technology, I do hope that as information spreads, and we've seen unfortunately conspiracy theories and misinformation, but I hope that there are still some net positives of information and science being more accessible to people. At least people can Google and learn about opioids, and they couldn't do that, years ago when this started. You can only trust your doctor, right? There's nothing, a lot of people don't understand about these people that were so poor addicted to opioids. They couldn't just Google what happens if I take this medication and get a warning that it's addictive after 3 weeks and to watch this and to do this. And no one could do that back then. And people, you don't just have a bunch of doctor friends on the line that you can call up either, right? So a lot of people don't realize that. So I hope that with technology, that information becomes more accessible to the wider population, and that helps to some extent. As far as limitations, I do think that the misinformation that spreads, I think, has just been in general harmful to the entire country, I guess, as a whole on on fronts like medicine and science, like, for example, there was a content creator called the Liver King who popularized eating like raw meat and raw liver and saying it's safe, and like he's advocating for it, and he's showing himself jacked and ripped and just super healthy. And so there are like also vulnerabilities to misinformation about science, whereas, you're eating raw meat regularly, you can get really sick and die. So there's always going to be, I think, pros and cons with information spreading, because some of it is true and some of it is not.
Right. Well, thank you so much, Madison. Where can people find you, support your work, learn more about you?
I stream. Yeah, thank you. I stream on Twitch irregularly, but I do it, and we have a lot of chats and talk about fun things, and also play some games and do different things at xGigglypuff, where you can find me on Twitch, on Twitter, on YouTube, and that's pretty much it. I tweet too much and I stream too little, but that's pretty much it.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I look forward to supporting more of your work, and I think that your skill set is really admirable.
Thank you so much.
I really hope you knock some sense into these people who are trying to tell you that not pasteurized stuff is the way to go.
Thank you so much. It was lovely speaking with you.
The Glitterpill Podcast.
The Glitterpill community, my Patreon, is where those who support my work as a public academic and public voice against far-right violence can help me continue this incredibly important work. It's also where we're building our resilience and sustainability efforts together. In addition to helping me contribute educated and well-researched information to our news outlets, members gain access to weekly self-care challenges, chats, and monthly user-driven reading selections, as well as virtual meetups through our book club, and also through somatic healing sessions, where sometimes I bring in a guest and sometimes I act as a peer facilitator based on best practices, what I know, what is known to be effective, what's worked in the community since 2020, and all the things I know help people feel good, relaxed, give them a less frazzled nervous system, maybe give them the opportunity to take a breath for the first time in the day. As people in our field, we don't really indulge in those moments, but they're so crucial to continuing this work and making sure we don't burn out. If you're committed, like I am, to countering the rising threat of far-right extremism and white supremacist terror in the United States and abroad, consider joining the Glitterpill community. Visit patreon.com/theglitterpill community to learn more. I look forward to seeing you there, and I look forward to seeing what we all build together.
The Glitterpill Podcast is hosted by Samantha Cudley, produced and edited by Darren Paul, and funded with support from listeners like you.